So we're therapists, but we're also just two friends who overanalyze literally everything.
Think of us like your group chat, but with a psychology degree. Welcome to License to Yet podcast.
Gaslighting, gatekeeping, girl bossing. Are we actually talking psychology here or just TikTok trends?
Welcome back, everyone. We're so happy that you're tuning back in. Following last week's sesh, today's topic is going to dive into mental health woke culture. We're going to be talking about what it means, the good, the bad, and of course, the ugly.
And the reason we wanted to talk about this is because social media has really blurred the lines between therapy and activism. And honestly, some of it has really become slang, memes, even jokes. But sometimes that makes mental health language a little bit more accessible, which is great. But other times it does water down the meaning and we lose the nuance of it. So today we're going to explore what's real, what's just trendy, and how to spot the difference.
I think it's really easy to watch a reel or TikTok and become confused on what all of these terms actually mean. It's easy for people to become easily influenced and believe that they fully understand terms like trauma bond, gaslighting, triggered, etc. And I think that that's really dangerous because the line between fact and sort of factual become blurred and misconstrued.
When you're hearing these terms everywhere, it's really easy to just start over identifying with them. Now, suddenly, half of TikTok is convinced that they have ADHD, autism, or borderline just because they relate to a 30-second clip. And on the flip side, people sometimes use these labels almost like a free pass. Like, well, I'm toxic because I have attachment issues, so you're just going to have to deal with it. But the reality is, these words have clinical roots and real life weight behind them. When they get thrown around too casually, it not only waters down the meaning, but it can keep people from taking the next step to actually get support or even an assessment if they need one. And it also shifts accountability. Instead of saying, I'm struggling and here's what I can work on, it becomes, this is just who I am, so I don't need to change, which is where that nuance really matters.
And I also want to say that on the flip side to that, we of course have talked about aspects where it can be dangerous, but it's also a beautiful thing to have platforms where mental health can be openly discussed and people can become educated on such topics. That is really important. That's why social media has gotten such a rise out of it. There definitely is a pro to this topic. We're definitely not saying that there is more negative than pros. But perhaps we spend some time just discussing how these platforms have made mental health more accessible. So, before entering the field, Veronica, were you being exposed to mental health online? How would you say that benefited you?
Definitely. And I think that's such an important point because it's not all bad, right? It gives us that bit of exposure that maybe we didn't have before. And honestly, before I even entered the field, a lot of my first exposure to these mental health conversations was online. I remember seeing posts about anxiety, trauma, or even self care and thinking, oh, that's actually me. Like I'm experiencing these things as well. It gave me language for things that maybe I didn't know how to describe yet. And that accessibility is huge because for so many people, especially in cultures or families where therapy isn't talked about, social media is sometimes the first place or the first time that they hear these concepts in a way that maybe feels a little bit more approachable. It can make you feel less alone, and sometimes it's the thing that'll push someone to actually reach out for help.
I think for me, it's really been about accessibility. I think you touched on this a little bit, but coming from an immigrant household where mental health was almost a taboo subject, let's be real, it was really great to have social media as, in my corner and being exposed to terms like trauma, abuse, trigger, all of those type of words. Because I was really how I started to put the pieces together and began to really understand what was likely happening to me. I think there was a lot that I internalized because I didn't have the resources then to understand what was happening. And so I just felt like, oh, okay, like, well, all of this dysfunction, all of this chaos is normal. And I just have to deal with it. Like the way that my body's reacting or the way that I'm reacting, my behaviors, my thought pattern, it's just normal. And it wasn't until I started to notice these terms on social media and had these conversations like at school very briefly that I started realizing like, oh, okay, wait a minute, this isn't necessarily normal. And it really made the experience for me and normalized it, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's such a powerful example. Last week, I had mentioned the term eldest daughter syndrome.
Mhm.
And obviously, that's not a real diagnosis. We're not going to find it in the DSM,
It should be though.
if honestly, and you won't find it in any clinical literature. But it does give sort of what I was alluding to earlier, that language to an experience that so many people, especially in immigrant households, can relate to. In psychology, in our training, we talk about things like birth order and family roles, kind of like we did last week.
Mhm.
But social media gave this phenomenon a name that felt maybe a little bit more approachable and relatable. And that's what makes it resonate. It's not about slapping on a label to realizing, like, oh, I'm not the only one who feels this way. There's other people who are having similar experiences and having a way to kind of start that conversation.
Exactly. Which again, I think reiterates how this movement has both normalized and made mental health more accessible. But I'm also curious about the challenge it possesses because I think we've alluded to some of those things already. So, what do you think are some of the challenges or dangers of mental health woke culture or what some may know as pop psychology?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is how social media has popularized certain therapy terms, but in the same process, I guess, it totally shifted their meaning, right? If we take gaslighting, for example, that's one that kind of comes to mind. Clinically, it's a really serious form of manipulation, typically abuse as well, meant to make someone doubt their own reality. But online, it gets watered down to things like, my friend said that new girl isn't funny. She's gaslighting me. Or my barista told me that Starbucks doesn't sell oat milk. They're gaslighting me. And when that happens, the word really loses its weight. It goes from describing a very real, very harmful pattern of abuse to basically it shifts the meaning to someone disagreed with me.
Right.
And that's when it gets dangerous because people who are actually experiencing gaslighting in abusive relationships will feel invalidated while everyone else is just using it as a joke. So the lines between fact and meme or joke really get blurred.
Right. That's exactly. I couldn't have said that better. I think also another way that this is very dangerous, and when individuals try to justify their problematic behaviors, whether that's because of a lack of accountability or responsibility, with these terms. So, one big example is that many individuals may attempt to justify like cutting everyone off to keep their peace, but the reality is we can't always do that. I mean, think for example, like work, right? Of course, you're not going to get along with everyone. Maybe you have a really shitty boss. Maybe you have really annoying coworkers that you would really truly like to cut everybody off. But what would happen if you cut everybody off? You would likely lose your employment.
Yeah.
So it's about sometimes knowing where that line is of, okay, I have to take accountability or responsibility for my behaviors and when it is truly, like you said, a clinical interpretation or some kind of behavior that is being put on you or projected onto you. So I think that's another way that I've seen these terms be thrown around and where it becomes very dangerous is trying to justify those behaviors, like that lack of accountability, that lack of responsibility for yourself and for your own actions.
Yeah, and that's where the accountability comes in. Boundaries and diagnoses should be tools for self awareness and growth, and not necessarily shields to avoid responsibility from yourself. It's one thing to say, I need space to protect my peace, and another to just cut people off left and right without ever building distrust tolerance. Labels explain our patterns, but they shouldn't excuse us from doing the work that's needed.
Yeah, and I think I love the way you said that. Like, how are we even building distress tolerance if we're not allowing ourselves to be in these distressing situations? Because I think another thing, and going a little bit off on a different tangent here, but I think another thing about the woke culture, mental health woke culture, is that we're taking things out of proportion. The reality is that life is hard. We're going to have negative emotions. We're going to be dealing with people who are not going to respect our boundaries. We're going to be dealing with situations that really put us in a sticky situation that are going to make us feel anxious, that are going to make us feel depressed. That doesn't necessarily mean that it is a problem in that moment. It's really just life. And we have to learn how to deal with those things and learn how to regulate ourselves in those circumstances. So I think that's another added thing of how these terms, misusing these terms or over analyzing these terms or over identifying with these terms becomes so dangerous because it's almost a way of like slapping a band-aid on and just saying, okay, I'm not willing to work on this much more because this is a boundary or because I identify with being on the spectrum or having ADHD. So it's a very thin line.
Yeah. And something that I even use, especially in my own work with my clients, is I do talk about this idea of having an explanation for something can be really beneficial, but it can never be an excuse.
Right.
right? We're taking the work out of it at that point. If we're excusing our behaviors based on whether or not we have a diagnosis. And I think that's something that we run into a lot of times with
Mm.
social media is people are self-diagnosing.
And they want the diagnosis so bad.
Yes. And I've even seen people identify so strongly with their diagnoses that they have them in their social media bios. That's
Right. It's a little far stretch.
yeah. Like I'm not going on Instagram and putting in my Instagram bio PCOS, anxiety disorder, right? We're not. Why? Why are we identifying so significantly with our diagnoses that we may or may not even have actually diagnosed from a professional?
Exactly.
That's one of the dangers that we're running into. I guess on top of that too, when we are seeking the support from someone who is diagnosing us, it doesn't stop at a diagnosis.
Right.
It's the tools to help you manage that diagnosis. And if we're just slapping these labels on, we're not using any tools. They're
Exactly.
excuses.
So again, the justification
Yeah.
of it with these labels, right? So very good point. I didn't even that didn't even come into my head, but yes, I've seen the over identification with diagnoses, and to your point, that maybe even haven't been diagnosed by a professional, a mental health professional, and it is a little scary just to see that. First and foremost, I don't think anyone in this field professionally would want any one of their clients or any individual to over identify with that
Yeah.
because it's just a part of you.
It's an explanation.
Right.
It's not an
It's just,
excuse.
a pattern of behaviors or a pattern of thought processes. It's not all of you.
Yeah.
Right. So it does become a very, like, I know we keep using the word dangerous, but it's just, I don't think there's any other word that I would say. It's just a scary way of looking at it, I think, just to see so many people. Maybe it's even a part of like wanting validation, wanting support. I'm not wanting to fit into a group. I'm not necessarily sure what the movement is really all about, but it's really important to just not over identify yourself with that because you're so much more than just X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So now that we've really spent some time kind of diving into the pros and the cons, I think it's important that we spend some time really diving into some of these terms, really digesting, deconstructing some of these terms, how they're seen online versus what they actually mean. So, what terms stand out to you the most?
I mean, I think the first one that really jumps out to me is the word triggered.
Oh, yeah.
That one's a hard one for me. And we even use it in our own language,
Mhm.
right? Outside of the therapy room. In fact, I literally used it not even an hour ago in something that we were talking about. But clinically, being triggered is when you have a trauma response and that gets activated. So your body and your mind are reacting to a reminder of something really painful or really traumatizing from the past. But online, it's kind of become almost like a punchline. Like I'm triggered because Starbucks spelled my name wrong, which that happens to me very frequently.
Me
Nobody
too.
spells my name incorrectly.
None of it.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
Maddie.
Yeah. But we're getting triggered, right? Because Starbucks is spelling your name.
I'm not gonna lie, that does trigger.
The problem is when we throw it around like that, it minimizes what it actually feels like to be triggered,
Right.
which can be really overwhelming and dysregulating. So I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't use the word triggering, but it's a difference in, triggering in regards to a trauma response.
Versus
And
something being
exactly. And I think that maybe that clarification is needed sometimes. It's not just about being annoyed, it's your nervous system going into survival mode.
it's a dysregulation. It's a very I've ever seen someone truly have a reaction to something. It's very intense. You can see it. Some people will shake, some people will cry, some people will scream, some people will throw things. I mean, it's a very intense reaction that you have no control over in the moment, unless you have the tools and unless you've practiced.
Yeah. I
Unless you
would,
know, or even if you know, like that's a trigger. Some people don't know what their triggers are until they're unfortunately put in a situation.
yeah. Well, and let's be honest, we're not experiencing this in a Starbucks
Right.
pickup.
Where did you get Maddie out of that? Whatever, it's just annoying, right? But that's a good distinction, I think, just knowing like a trigger doesn't equal being annoyed. It's a bigger response to something.
Yeah. What about you? What words come up for you?
I think I alluded to this earlier, but definitely boundaries or setting of boundaries. Since I've already kind of talked about this, clearly I have a lot to say about it. So originally, boundary setting refers to the practice of clearly communicating and maintaining personal limits to protect one's emotional, mental, and sometimes even physical well-being. So I want to talk about what that really means versus when it's not. So this may look like saying no to a friend who frequently dumps on you. We talked about that in last week's session. It may also look like not responding to work emails after hours because we're prioritizing our self-care, or asking a partner to not raise their voice during disagreements. because that's not needed when you're communicating. It really isn't. What it's not is avoiding accountability. That may look like setting a boundary because you're simply trying to avoid something or using it to control other people. So that may be like if you talk to your ex, I'm setting a boundary and ending the relationship. That's more of wanting to control another person. You can definitely say something along the lines of, I'm not comfortable with you speaking to your ex.
Yeah.
Can we find a compromise or can we do something? That's different than wanting to say, if you do this, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think it also talks about like the inflexibility of people too. Like some people, I have encountered people who will say like, this is my boundary and I'm not going to budge or I'm not even going to discuss it. That's just being rigid.
It's so unrealistic.
It's like, again, if we go back to that work example, like imagine you say to your boss, this is my boundary and I'm not going to budge.
You're fired.
Okay, bye.
Yeah, they're not putting up with that.
They're not because it's not realistic.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be said about boundaries because I think that's a huge buzzword right now. And I love the movement of wanting to protect your peace and put yourself first, your needs and your wants first. But there is a way to do it that is correct, quote unquote correct, versus being rigid, being inflexible, and being less accountable for your own actions.
Yeah. And that comes with a lot of even just communication. I think a lot of times what we're seeing is people are ghosting, right? And they're calling that a boundary. That's not a boundary. You're just being an asshole.
Yeah. You're not communicating nothing. You're just cutting off.
Yeah. And the reality is none of us are reading each other's minds. We're not going to know what, I mean, maybe I don't know what your boundaries are unless you tell me what your boundaries are.
Right.
So yeah, that's a difficult one that I see coming up a lot. I think for a lot of people, it's just easy to say this is my boundary when they're feeling uncomfortable. And let's be honest, a lot of people aren't very confrontational, especially when it comes to personal needs. So it's easier to just blame it or not blame it on a boundary and just ghost.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, kind of in line with that in a way. Gaslighting, I feel like I hear a lot of too. Again, clinically, it's a really serious form of manipulation where someone intentionally makes you doubt your own sanity or your own reality. In abusive relationships, a partner can hide things and then insist that you're imagining it. But online, it's taken on a whole different life. A lot of people use gaslighting to mean that someone's just lying, disagreeing, or even having a different opinion. Like if you don't think pineapple belongs on pizza, stop gaslighting me. So there's a huge difference between the very harmful original meaning and the trivial way that it's thrown around on social media.
That is such a good point. I think gaslighting is another one of those terms that just really stresses me out because it is such a dangerous manipulation tactic in abusive relationships. And the way that it's being thrown out in social media right now really scares me because for those individuals who, I think you said this earlier, but for those individuals who are going through true gaslighting, if they see this word be thrown around the way it is, how could they really know that what's happening to them is a true abuse tactic?
Yeah. It's almost like we're gaslighting people on what gaslighting means.
Exactly.
Talk about gaslighting.
Talk about gaslighting, but that's the reality. You have to think about individuals who are going through abuse because clinically speaking, individuals who are in abusive relationships don't know that they're in abusive relationships most of the time. And they don't know that these manipulation tactics exist. So that, to one end, it's great to have access to these terms, but on the other hand, it's like we need to be responsible about how we're using them because we may have another person on the other end saying like, oh, okay, well, this term kind of seems like it applies, but this is too trivial for me to really think that it applies to me.
Yeah. And I think along with all of these that we're going to talk about, there's just that level of responsibility. Not everyone, but a lot of people are going to throw these words out. And if we're using it in a way where we're offending people or we're minimizing what people are experiencing, that's where the issue comes in. But yeah.
I think we have only buzzwords for today. It's something like it's dangerous, responsibility, accountability, but it's really about us really adhering to those and there's reasons for it. I think also as we're talking about like abusive relationships or just cycles of abuse, manipulation tactics, another one that I've seen be thrown around so much lately in the therapy room, outside the therapy room, by my friend, by my family, however, wherever, whoever is narcissist. So I just want to reiterate to people that individuals can have narcissistic tendencies, but not fit the diagnoses of narcissistic personality disorder. NPD, which is narcissistic personality disorder, is a very serious personality disorder. So we can't just throw that around because someone has those tendencies.
Very damaging.
Right. What I think happens here is that we're really talking about negative traits individuals might have. So that might be like lying, that might be cheating, that might be like mild versions of manipulation. I'm not even sure if that's a possibility, but I think that's really what people are alluding to, like these negative traits that another person might have that maybe align with what they've seen in movies
Yeah.
of a narcissist or of narcissistic personality disorder.
I think a big one that I see too is when people are overly confident,
Yeah.
that people will just call them narcissists, which
Like,
narcissists can tend to be overly confident, right?
oh,
But that's not the only reason why someone
yes.
will be confident.
There's grandiosity there because yeah, I think I've seen that too, right? Where if so, I don't know if this is a social media thing or just society telling us like we shouldn't be confident, but if you see anyone who is confident or if you see somebody who is they're really valuing their self-worth, all of a sudden that's seen as narcissistic or
Yeah.
a narcissist, which is a whole different episode in itself. But that's something that I've seen lately, and really like the original meaning of narcissist or what we would categorize as somebody with narcissistic personality disorder is a pattern of grandiosity, a need for admiration, and a lack of empathy for others. So that's the clinical meaning. Online usage is often about pathologizing normal human behavior. So again, that aspect of self-confidence, of someone being recognized for something that they're doing, and we're really labeling based on one behavior, which again, if we're talking about really a true narcissist, it requires a constant pattern of specific traits. And of course, again, we kind of talk about labeling another person as narcissistic or as a narcissist might also allude to the idea of you or the person who's using it trying to avoid accountability or deflect onto that person. Like maybe somebody who doesn't have a lot of self-esteem
Yeah.
and they see another person like, oh, this person didn't text me back. Like, you're such a narcissist. Okay. Like, I know that it sucks. Or haven't, people haven't typed me back to me and I'm like, wow, I'm burdened over here. But
Yeah.
that doesn't make the other person a narcissist. I'm just not interested. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, that's human behavior, normal
Yeah.
human behavior.
I think the damaging part of it is with narcissistic personality disorder, we run into narcissistic abuse.
Right.
And if we are pointing our fingers at people for, displaying maybe some difficult
Yeah.
traits, right? Or they
Neg-
have a difficult moment, even, it's really damaging to point our finger at them and say, oh, you're a narcissist, because we're implying that they're also emotionally abusive in that sense.
Right.
That's extremely damaging.
Right. Right. And I think on top of that, I also think that how these I'm gonna be careful with my words. How these mental health diagnoses are portrayed in movies also emphasize how these characteristics look, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I think I've definitely seen some movies where a narcissist or narcissistic personality disorder definitely could fit somebody who's being arrogant
Mhm.
or somebody who needs control or somebody who is very dominant. Like, I can see how somebody might get that confused and might think, okay, this person is a narcissist. But again, there's the actual NPD diagnosis requires a lot more than just those traits.
Yeah, we're skipping a lot of steps here when we're
Too
making
many
those,
steps.
yeah, way too many steps.
Way too many steps.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, all personality disorders really stem from trauma. And in that sense, if we're throwing around narcissism, we're just telling people that they have a very traumatic past.
It's
And
traumatizing.
yeah, they're just so traumatized, which is actually the case for people who have NPD. Some of these behaviors, like if someone is just, really proud of themselves in the moment, maybe they can't contain their proudness and they're loud about it, and that's okay. They're allowed to be. But to turn around and say, well, they're a narcissist implies that they're traumatized and they can't control themselves. That's unfair.
It is really, truly unfair.
Yeah, this is on a totally different ballpark of terms. Girl boss kind of comes up for me. And I think it's a really interesting one because it started off as this really empowering term. Women are reclaiming space in male dominated industries and celebrating their ambition. So, kind of in line with what we just talked about with NPD here, being loud and celebrating our own ambition. But over time, I feel like it's kind of shifted into this critique of hustle culture and toxic positivity. So instead of being about empowerment, it's starting to feel more like pressure. Like you have to be grinding, you have to build an empire. Every single hobby needs to be a side hustle just so you can prove your worth. So what was once meant to uplift women almost became another impossible standard that, let's be honest, we can't reach these standards that are already put on us in the beginning. And now we're putting this girl boss pressure on ourselves to have a full-time job, have a side hustle, have hobbies, but turn those also into a side hustle.
Be
Be a
fun,
mother. Yeah.
but still be feminine
Yeah.
in the way that society wants us to be feminine. Because what the hell does it mean to be feminine? Like, femininity looks so different for every woman.
Yeah.
But going off of that, there's so much that I can say about this because I think for both of us, this really applies in a deeper way. So a little bit more of oversharing here, but I think this is something that within the last couple of years, I'd say 3 years, has really stuck with me. Again, coming from an immigrant household, being a woman of color in today's day and age. I think this girl boss aspect, or just like in general, just hustle culture, like maybe I'm just going to expand into hustle culture, has really ingrained the sense of pressure in me of wanting to prove my worth when there really is no need.
Yeah.
But hustle culture really makes it seem like, okay, well, let's see how much you can do. Let's see how much you can give back to society. Let's see how much you can obtain. And it's really stuck with me. It's something that I'm still trying to fight to this day of like, I don't need to have all of these certificates, all of these titles after my name to prove that I'm worth my life.
Mhm.
But in a way, hustle culture really exasperates that. And it makes a lot of other people feel that pressure where it wasn't even intended to be that. Like you said, girl boss was supposed to be an empowering term. And somehow, somewhere or another, it became, I love the way that you put it, this impossible, just another impossible standard where again, we have to meet all the needs of everyone while still trying to obtain our dreams, while still trying to hold space in spaces where we weren't meant to be.
Yeah. And I think that the meaning that it took on is so dynamic. A lot of things kind of add into that. And I think you and I are kind of in this really unique situation right now where we were overworked, overburdened in community mental health. And we both recently left in the past couple months. I left first and then you did, where hustle culture was that was it. That's the norm, right? You're supposed to be seeing million clients on your caseload and you need to be doing these assessments that take forever to do, but also you're hearing your managers in the background saying work-life balance, work-life balance. And it's like,
So what
well,
are you doing to provide?
yeah, yeah. And so I think we are in a really interesting position now where we're unlearning that. I feel like bodily in a sense, somatically,
Yeah,
where we've been so overburdened with everything. I mean, even grad school, jumping into internship, our first full-time job, where now our day-to-day looks so different. We don't have that much on our plate anymore. And I mean, we've talked privately about how are we sane right now? Like we don't have a 40-hour work week. We feel like we're not doing anything. And I think it really is unlearning what society has told us, especially being a woman. We have responsibilities at home. We have expectations to be a great wife, a future mother. And how are we balancing all of these things? It's impossible.
it is impossible. And I think also with that, we're both women who have really big dreams. I mean, we are chasing our own private practice at some point. I'm chasing potentially a PhD. I mean, these are really big dreams that we have. So I think it's easy to fall into that cycle of, oh, okay, now that we're not hustling,
Mhm.
how are we getting closer to these dreams?
How
Like,
do we pour into that?
right, how am I pouring into that if I'm not overworking myself? So I think you're totally right. That's almost like somatically, we're having to release that ideology because it's so ingrained. And I think just anyone who is coming from an immigrant background or just anyone who comes from a middle to lower class social economic status, like you have almost that nature of I need to be hustling all
Yeah.
the time because that is the only way I'm going to get out of this.
Yeah.
And at least that's something that I'm having to unlearn right now. That I mean, a little bit oversharing here too, but I'm losing my mind right now, guys. As I've been transitioning into private practice, it's been a very hard transition. It's super slow. It's definitely something that I've come to learn that I have to slow down because there is a huge pro that's going to come after this, but it's okay to rest. And I think that's where that toxicity comes in of like this hustle culture that it tells you it's not okay to rest. If you
Yeah.
rest, you're putting yourself back 10 steps when
Yeah.
that's not a reality.
Yeah. And what's reality is that rest is productive. And
Yeah.
society tells us that it's not productive. It's you being lazy. And that's not the case.
Right.
I have so many experiences in my life, whether personally or just with people in my life, where they're hustling, 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 and all of a sudden something happens either medically, or somatically where their body makes them rest.
Yeah, they just collapse
Yeah.
because they can't handle it. It's just a reality. Like this is just the mind body. Like if you're not going to listen to your mind, then your body's going to do it. I mean, just realistically, like
Yeah.
it's going to happen. I definitely think that the spectrum from girl boss to hustle culture to this idea of like toxic positivity, like that all kind of is its own type of term that hold a lot of power there. But I think another one too that I have a lot to say about this one, but this is another term that I think is being overused, trauma bond.
Mhm.
So I see this a lot with like TikTok, Reels, what TikTok calls pop psychology, I guess. So this term may be confused with just having maybe gone through a not so great experience with somebody, like maybe say you and your friend, or even just us.
We've definitely used trauma bond describing our community mental health.
Very community mental health. Like we went through that really negative experience, and notice that I'm using the word negative, not traumatizing, because it wasn't traumatizing, maybe in some aspects, but it was a negative experience. It wasn't a great experience. We went through that together. And I think some people would confuse that and say, oh, okay, we have a trauma bond now because we went through that same experience together. And it was negative. When in reality, what a true trauma bond is, it is an emotional attachment that forms between an abused individual and their abuser. And it often is characterized by a cynical pattern of abuse. Again, it's one of those things that comes out of an abusive, toxic relationship, household, whatever you want to look at it. It's much, much deeper than what we make it to be. Sometimes when I think of trauma bond, I think of Stockholm syndrome,
Yeah.
where you really start to feel a sense of sympathy for your abuser.
Yeah. I think even kind of in line with that too is Munchausen's by
Yes,
proxy, right? Because we have this person that we trust, but they're abusing us maybe in a sense that we're not used to, right? It's more so in a medical sense, but we're so trusting of this individual. We're not realizing it's abuse. And it really is that it's a deeply personal experience between the abuser and the victim or the survivor, whatever word we want to use. Like you said, it's cynical, but it's also very cyclical too. It's this disgusting abusive pattern that doesn't stop, unfortunately, until a lot of times it's the victim, the survivor, is able to take themselves out of it one way or another. And that's always the most dangerous aspect of it is that phase in that cycle where we're taking ourselves out of that situation. That's the most dangerous part of it. Because a lot of times, I mean, we can go into statistics, but that's when most people unfortunately get attacked or,
They're at most danger.
yeah, exactly.
Talk about how does this logically make sense? Like explaining this to another individual is really difficult. Explaining that you feel sympathy for somebody who's abused you.
Hmm.
But it's such, like you said, cyclical. It's just a cycle that you just get used to. And it's almost like a sense what comes into play with trauma bonds is usually this learned helplessness where you just really think, there's no way out.
Yeah.
It's just a way of, I have to deal with it. It's going to get better because it has. There are really good days, there are really bad days. We should talk about how this is even like a reinforcement schedule, right? Where like abusers know what they're doing, like the love bombing, take that, for example. You have somebody who love bombs you, shows you all this affection, and then all of a sudden they become very controlling, very abusive. And then when you're about to leave, what do? They go right back to acting super great and super lovey and super everything because really it's this roller coaster of these up and downs. So
Yeah.
it is a very serious term that is thrown around and one that is very hard for anyone who is going through that, who has truly trauma bonded with another individual, with their abuser. It's very hard to explain, very much so.
Yeah. So a lot of times, kind of like Mady said, friends will maybe joke about some difficult experiences that they've been through, right? We have certainly joked about our difficult experiences together, whether you're both having bad breakups at the same time. Maybe you're going through a really intense conflict with another friend. That's not actually trauma bonding. It's just connecting through a shared experience, which obviously that can be valid. That can be very healing, which is something that we even talked about last week, right? Like how healing it was for both of us to go through such a very difficult experience together, having that support in one another. That support is not there in real trauma bonding.
Exactly.
There's no support there.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
That's a good way of putting it.
yeah, so it's obviously very different from the actual clinical meaning of what trauma bonding is.
So now that class is over, Maybe we can talk a bit about how to use these terms appropriately and responsibly because the goal is to keep these conversations going, but making sure that we're getting it right and that other people are getting it right. We want these conversations to continue to come out. We want mental health to continue to be accessible to loads and loads of people because that is what is really educating others on what might be happening to them. So, what do you think is key to using these terms responsibly?
Well, I think it definitely starts with the context. It matters how, where, and why we're using these terms. It's one thing to jokingly tell your friend that they're gatekeeping when they won't share their favorite coffee order, or another to throw that same word around when we're actually talking about someone limiting access to real opportunities or resources, which unfortunately we see happening a lot nowadays. Um, we're not going to get political today.
Mhm.
It's about knowing when a term can be used playfully versus when it carries weight. Because when we blur those lines too much, we either minimize serious situations or we overinflate the everyday stuff that we're all experiencing.
You're absolutely right. I think it's almost about checking yourself and asking, am I using this word to describe or to dismiss? We go right back to the idea of accountability, asking yourself if this is a way I am just justifying negative behavior, or is this a way I'm attempting to avoid? Is this a way attempting to deflect? Whatever it might be. I'm going to get a little personal here because I think this is really important and it showcases this so perfectly. I've been with my partner now for 11 years and I've gone through a lot in my childhood. There was a lot of dysfunction, a lot of chaos. So naturally you get used to the chaos, to the dysfunction, and without even knowing it, you become that as well. Sometimes, not everybody, right? But I went through a period where I was very angry. I was very angry. I held a lot of anger. I held a lot of resentment. And I did not know that I was deflecting or I was projecting my anger. Unfortunately, usually we do that with our safe people because those are the people that we feel comfortable showing those emotions with. So naturally, of course, it fell on my partner. And I remember many times thinking that I was almost using my trauma or just saying like, oh, this is the way I grew up to justify my whatever the hell you want to call them, my flip outs, my
Rush outs.
rants. Yeah, my whatever, right? And I quickly had to, I had a moment of like realization where I was like, that doesn't make any sense that I'm sitting here saying, oh, okay, I can act this way because I was traumatized or this is what I saw in my childhood. Okay, sure. This is what I saw. That can be an explanation, but it isn't a justification.
Yeah.
So I had to do a lot of work internally there to realize that, okay, I'm using this as a way to justify that because I'm unwilling to work on that.
Mm.
And so it was finally it really took a toll on my relationship for a little bit. So that's when I realized like I gotta put my shit together. Like
Yeah.
I need to stop avoiding this. I need to stop dismissing it and saying that, oh, this is just the way that I am because this is what I saw and that's just that. That is where we, my misuse of trauma, I guess, because again, it can be an explanation, but it's not going to be a justification for negative behaviors. I had to be accountable for the negative behaviors I was exploiting, I guess, on other people.
Mhm.
It's not fair.
Yeah.
There's no shame in that, I think. I can
Mm.
say that now. But what I really want to get out there is like that's how we use these words responsibly. That you have to look at it and say, like, why am I using these terms? How am I using these terms? How am I using these terms to justify my own behaviors? How am I using these terms to justify my own life actions or my own life decisions? That's how we really should be thinking about them. They're not meant to be justifications.
Yeah. And I love how you tied that back to accountability because I think obviously we've all been there. I know for me, I've definitely had moments where I tried to justify my own reactions instead of actually just sitting with that emotion that comes up and working through it. And that's a slippery slope with buzzwords because they can either open the door to growth or they can become an excuse to stay stuck. Like you said, if a term really resonates with you, if you're hearing words like trauma bond or gaslighting or thinking, this actually feels way too close to home, that can be a sign for you to reach out for support. There's no shame in that. And I'll open up here too as a therapist who is actually taking a break from therapy right now, but as a therapist who is in therapy, that has been something that has been really eye opening. And I think a lot of people don't think that therapists are in therapy for themselves. It's so natural to just sit with our own reactions, but not sit in it in a sense of exploring why am I feeling this way? What is coming up for me? What is this linked to?
Right.
It's always going to be linked to something. We might not be able to point it out right in that moment, but after some reflection, and it might even be years later, right? I've definitely had situations where, like, even maybe I did something stupid in high school and looking back on it, maybe a year ago in therapy, I'm like, okay, wow, that's where that came from.
Okay,
That
okay, connect
makes
the dots.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. When we're feeling that, like what I said earlier, like this feels way too close to home. Why am I connecting to this buzzword that's being thrown out? Is there actually something substantial behind it that we can explore? There's absolutely no shame in exploring that. Like I said, that's where your real healing can start. And maybe it does look like, going to therapy, exploring that aspect, or journaling, doing some deeper inner work.
Mhm. And you'd be surprised. Most of our reactions and our behaviors, they happen at an unconscious level. Like I said, I wasn't even aware that I was coming off with so much anger. And it wasn't until I had to take a step back and realize, like, I'm dismissing this and making it somebody else's responsibility when it's my responsibility to heal this. No one else is going to do that for me. It's one thing to go through a traumatizing experience or to go through some kind of trauma and have reactions and have behaviors like that's completely valid. But truly, maybe this might be a unpopular opinion for some people. But what I don't believe is fair or valid or justified is if you continue that just because that happened to you. You do yourself a disservice and you do everyone else around you who is a disservice.
Yeah. Well, I think too, kind of what comes up for me as you say that is this idea that a traumatic experience isn't a choice.
Right.
That's something that happens to us. But what we do have a choice in is the way that we heal from it.
Right.
And if healing looks like nursing our wounds with a bottle of liquor or numbing ourselves with, a little trip to the dispensary every few days, that is going to look very different than someone who's doing the actual real hard work. And that's what usually is putting people off, is because it's very difficult work.
Oh yeah.
Is it difficult? Yes. Is it rewarding? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so much to be said about that. I think that could be, it is probably going to be its own episode later on
Get
in
us
life.
with all these episode ideas.
Yes, because it's just such an important thing, But again, knowing when to use them because they hold so much weight. I think that's what we're really trying to emphasize here. These terms hold a lot of weight, and they could really you never know who might need that information, who might really need that go education of like this is really what this word means. Oh, okay, actually, this is something that I'm going through. So thank you for giving me this information because now I have a blueprint of what I might be able to do or what my resources might be. So it's just about that responsibility, that accountability, and of course, like here and there, throwing those words, sure, but just knowing that there's a time and there's a place.
Absolutely. So I think the biggest takeaway here is that these words don't have to be thrown out completely, just like you said. We just need a little bit of balance, right? And I think that's a buzzword in itself. If we're going to go ahead and end off the episode with a buzzword, maybe balance is a good one. It can be really validating when it's used the right way, but we also don't want to lose that depth behind them.
Just being aware of the power that they hold. And again, knowing that, we can reiterate this here, there's a time and there's a place. And knowing that there's a possibility that these terms might be helpful for another person, we just have to know how to utilize them. It's essentially, I'm going to sound a little cliche here, but it is essentially kind of like a little bit of a superpower. So we have to know when is the right time for them to be used playfully versus when they should be used, maybe more in a clinical sense.
Yeah. Well, and at the end of the day, social media has the power to start that conversation, but it shouldn't be ending there. So if a word or a concept is really resonating with you, like I said earlier, maybe that's your sign to dig deeper, whether that's in therapy, journaling, or just being more mindful about how you're showing up.
Remembering that there's absolutely no shame in admitting that something isn't quite right or that you're struggling with something or just admitting that you're using some of these words incorrectly. That is totally fine. There's no shame in that. It's all about what you're willing to do now that you have this information and just feeling that there's so much support out here. And even if you don't feel it, we're the first line of support here and we're always going to be here. So yeah, I just think the buzzwords that really stuck out today is going to be like that balance, that accountability, responsibility, healing, I think eventually snuck its way in there
Yep.
too. So even though many of us have had the privilege to have access to these terms through social media, just understand that what we see online isn't always what it really means. So it's also our responsibility to know when to do the extra work and to dig a little bit deeper.
Beautifully put. All right. Well, I think that is it for us today. I think we engaged in some really good, insightful conversation. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up.
We hope that you enjoyed today's episode. If there are any episode ideas that anybody wants us to talk about or any topics that anyone would like us to cover, please feel free to either send us a message on Instagram at License to Yap Pod or comment. I believe you can comment on Spotify, right?
Yeah, you leave comments on Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, that's an option. Don't believe Apple is doing that, but you can find us everywhere else.
Feel free to interact with us and give us any ideas if you're wanting to hear specific topics.
Okay, well, until next time, be gentle with yourself and your people. We'll yap with you next week. Thanks for hanging out with us today. If something resonated with you, send this episode to a friend or leave us a review. It helps us more than you know.
Please follow us on Spotify or anywhere you get your podcasts and follow License to Yap on Instagram at License to Yap Pod.